Hello, my name is Lorraine and I'm Head of Education at the National Museum of Ireland. And you're all very welcome to our event this afternoon as part of the What's the Scéal series of storytelling events at the Museum of Country Life. This week-long programme celebrates storytelling as an art form, as an important part of our heritage, and as a medium through which we can understand who we are as a people. In the museum, we have a wealth of stories behind the objects in our collections. We often invite storytellers to engage people in the stories behind those objects, and through their storytelling, they can bring these objects alive. And that is what happened this week when we had schools from all over the country participating in storytelling sessions with storytellers Nuala Hayes, Pat Ryan, and Jack Lynch. And the school children were captivated. And for an older audience, you can be certain to be captivated by the stories that Jack Lynch and Len Graham will share with you tomorrow at 2:30 online. But today, we are reflecting on where storytelling is in Ireland today in what will be a very engaging and inspiring discussion. Before we continue, I would like to say a big thanks to all who were involved in the background in organising this week of storytelling events. At the museum, I'd like to thank the team in education, Tom Doyle, Brendan MacDonald and Sheila Stenson, our marketing team, Anne Daly, Maeve McNichols, Francis Toner and Brian Houlihan, our IT team, Gavin Woodruff and Derek Williams, and Seamus O'Donnell and his team in the facilities department at the museum. I would also like to thank Pat Burke for all his work and his advice in helping us to put this programme together. This project builds on the strong partnership we have with Poetry Ireland, and I would like to thank Jane O'Hanlon of Poetry Ireland for her ongoing collaboration with us at the museum and for sharing so generously her expertise and support in organising this series of events. I'd like to welcome you all, as I said today, to this event and to this programme we're hoping to run next year as well. And now I would like to hand you over to Jane O'Hanlon to say a few words. So over to you, Jane.
Thanks, Lorraine, and hello, everybody. It is just wonderful to be here and to be here with friends working in the museum and friends who are storytellers and people with whom I have worked for a long number of years. And this is a wonderful day and a wonderful symposium, which will be of huge interest and great fun, I'm expecting. So on behalf of Poetry Ireland, I'm delighted and we're delighted to once again be working with the National Museum of Ireland, building on our long relationship and common objectives through this initiative, What's the Scéal? The role of the museums and storytelling has never been more important as people seek to find meaning, understanding and purchase during these very troubled times that we're living through, times which we have no idea what impact they're eventually going to have on us. But I suspect it will be through storytelling that we will begin to understand our common experiences. The best way to understand ourselves is to understand our past by coming into contact with the objects and the stories that help us to connect with that heritage. And we call storytelling an intangible heritage, but in many ways, I was just thinking about it and I mentioned this earlier, it is probably one of the most tangible heritages we have, and never more so tangible than in the embodiment and the people who bring us those stories, because it is the mediators that is and are as important as the message, because the medium is the message very much in this case. And I've sat in on the school sessions this week and that was never more obvious than during those sessions. It's a pleasure to be working with the Museum of Country Life and some of our finest storytellers who will help us today to listen, to speak, to think, and hopefully to learn a little bit. And it's also a great pleasure to introduce Terry McDonough. He's a poet and dramatist from Mayo via the world. He's a self-employed and widely travelled poet, writer and dramatist from Kil'Adon, Kilchima. I know a place which he knows and loves and speaks about very much. He writes for adults and young people, and he's been with the Poetry Ireland Writers in School scheme for at least 20 years, if not more, and vast experience working with all ages in many countries, particularly in the areas of creative writing and drama, and that is theatre in education. He was drama director at the International School of Hamburg and travelled to many countries during those workshops, during that time giving workshops and shows, and working with groups of all ages and all sizes. And I have witnessed Terry working with a group of 60, not very much older than 7 or 8 year olds, and managing to get them to produce and to create and to perform. And it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. His poetry for young people includes Boxes and Echolocation, and his latest collection, Time Capsules, and his works included in the Gill Education publication for Junior Cycle. His own publications include, and I'll just mention the last 4, The Truth in Mustard, published in 2010, Ripple Effect, Lady Cassie Peregrina in 2016, and his latest collection, Fourth Floor Fat, 44 cantos, published in 2018, all of which can be found through Ireland House. It's a great pleasure and a delight to be here today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say. So over to you, and over to you, Terry.
Well, thank you very much, Jane. I have to look over my shoulder to see exactly who you're talking about, but thank you very much for all your kind words. It's also a great pleasure for me today to be here working with the National Museum of Ireland, with Nuala House. It's fantastic. And I look forward very much to working with Donald Smith and Nuala Hayes. They will speak for 15 minutes each, and then we'll have a panel discussion and then question and answer. Our first person today is Donald Smith. He's from Scotland, of Irish parents. He is the chief executive of the Traditional Arts and Culture of Scotland. He has done special studies on tales and legends of Celtic saints. He works with adults and children. He's involved in walks in community work with adults and children. He's a director of the Scottish International Storytelling Festival. So we're very, very lucky to have Donald here with us today. I'm really, really excited to listen what he has to say and his contribution, because the story is the most important thing we can tell our children. The story is what we are. A story makes us what we are. It's our story. It's the story of life itself. And then we have Nuala Hayes. Nuala Hayes is a well-known artist in Ireland. She's an actor. She has worked with children. She's a broadcaster. She's a storyteller. She works with music. She works with adapting literature, Mary Lavin's stories. She is such a well-known and such a very vibrant and somebody who has played such a major role for the last 30 years or so in education and in storytelling, keeping storytelling alive as we know it today. So you're all very, very welcome to this wonderful afternoon of the Symposium of Storytelling and Tales and Legends. And now we'd like to continue, and the first person I'm going to call on now is Donald Smith, and he's going to speak now for the next 15 minutes. Over to you, Donald.
Thank you very much, Terry, and hello, everyone. And it's a real honour and a pleasure to be part of this Scéaltas event at the National Museum, and to see so many fine storytellers, many of whom I've had the pleasure of listening to over the years, taking part in this first event, the first, we hope, of many to come. Now, the connection I want to just home straight in on is this link between storytelling and memory. And one might define that even slightly more closely and talk about oral memory. And what we're really meaning there is, what is it that one can hold in the imagination and the mind in one continuous episode, what can be told and what can be heard, and received in that one continuous sharing and storytelling. And I can date my realization of this dimension of life, oral memory, quite specifically to being at age 7 for the first time visiting relatives in Ireland. My first time in Ireland, age 7. All my relatives, parents originally from Ireland. And this was in County Derry, and it's a long trip, despite the fact we're not going to have Boris's Brunel or whatever it was between Ireland and Scotland. It's a long trip for a wee lad of 7. And we had arrived pretty late in County Derry after the rail and the boat and car and all the rest of it. And it was a pretty restless night on the top floor of this old farmhouse, quite exciting, quite strange. And just as first light began to creep into the room, a trapdoor opened in the ceiling, and a ginormous, bare, horny foot appeared through the ceiling, quite grimy, with the hugest uncut toenails that I had ever seen. And the foot was followed by a second bare, horny foot, and then by this stooped figure, of which looked to me like Rip Van Winkle, this old man, I think in fact he was only about 70, who let down a stair and descended from the hole in the ceiling. Now, this was Willie O'Hara, who was, as we would say in Scotland, the Ora Loon, the jobbing man around the farm where he'd lived for decades and decades, and he was a figure of legend and story. Now, that was the beginning for me of an experience, a completely fresh experience of living in a community where oral memory still really counted. Of course, people read books. Of course, people watched the telly. But the storytelling, the sharing of memories as part of the fabric of everyday life was the stronger thing, the more connected thing. And that was the start of many, many years in which I spent most of every summer in Ireland, and just getting deeper and deeper into that sense of a community where storytelling still mattered. And that was the foundation of my whole ongoing interest in storytelling. And of course, what was also reflected there was this constant to and fro between Scotland and Ireland, where you have these things that are similar, but also things that are different. It's a relationship of cousins, but things are different, and that applies to storytelling and the way that storytelling traditions have been reconnected with or revived in contemporary society. I would just like then to touch on one or two aspects of the contemporary storytelling situation. While I think emphasizing the continuing sense of the way that we are shaped by our childhood and inherited experiences. And for me, storytelling opened a kind of trapdoor in the imagination that has never closed. So clearly, tradition, the inherited tradition of storytelling and the collections of stories plays an important part in both Irish and Scottish culture. But I think it can be overplayed. And we have to avoid too literal a reading or too much of a reverence for tradition. Because I think what I've found is that it probably in storytelling, it's the creative fluidity, it's the process, the methodology, the making and remaking of stories in a living connection and community that is what tradition really gives us, not a fixed set of content or a fixed set of occasions, as valuable as some of those things may be. It's the creative process, the ongoing fluidity and power of that oral memory. The second thing that is a big issue that I have had to wrestle with through the decades of being involved in storytelling is context, the places where storytelling happens. And when I was starting out in all this, there was very much a bit of an attitude, oh, well, but that's artificial, you know. I mean, we did it when it was done in the old days, it was natural. There was the Cayley house, there was round the fireside. I mean, you're setting up an event for this. That can't really be natural. It can't be the same. And I think that's where you have to say there was a need for a very determined intervention, where in libraries and cafes and pub sessions and museums, in outdoor walks, in all these different contexts, one had to actively reintroduce and encourage a sense of live storytelling because it had been displaced. And that was something we stuck with and has produced great outcomes in terms of storytelling being accepted as part of education programs, small art centres, theatres, and so forth. And that then raises the third question, which I'm sure we're going to touch on, you know, who are the storytellers? How are storytellers formed? What do they contribute? And that, in my experiences, ranges from people who are still what you might call community anchors, local tradition bearers, vital people, still in a locality, and also those who have developed storytelling as part of their professional lives. And I see them as kind of bridge builders of meaning, bridge builders between creative content and social contexts, whether in education, in community work, in ecological and environmental work, in well-being and health. And I think that there is a contemporary profession of storytellers who have developed those kind of bridge building skills. And I think they have a great contribution to make. So yes, storytelling is still a performance tradition, but it's also a mode of engagement and development socially and personally for people in contemporary society. And these, I think, just I'm going to wrap up on some of the sort of big objectives, if you like, or purposes and prizes that I think lie with storytelling, which is that sense of empowerment, of enabling voices to be heard, of reconciling different experiences and perspectives, of encouraging dialogue and people to listen and learn from each other. I think there's a huge sense of environmental reconnection with nature that runs like a thread, a gold thread, I think, right back through tradition, and that can be renewed and reenacted in contemporary situations. And many other things, you know, stories of migration and family connection, and now asylum and refugee, all these big human experiences and challenges that pose disruptions and gaps and difficulties, and cry out for that weaving of meaning that was mentioned in some of the introductions. So I look forward to this conversation very much, and it's a rich topic, and I'm sure we'll only be able to unpick some of it this afternoon, but I know it's going to be a good conversation. So thank you, Terry.
The next hour or so. And now we're going to go on to Nuala Hayes. And as I said, Nuala is a very well-known Irish storyteller, actor, broadcaster, performer, worked with children, with everybody under the sun. And it's an absolute pleasure to introduce her here today. So I hand you over now to you, Nuala.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? It tells me here the host has muted my mic. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see
Oh, very
anything
good.
on my screen.
Oh, right. Okay. Can you see me?
No,
Everybody can see and hear me.
yeah, I can't
Somebody.
see anything.
Okay, well, anyway, I'll carry on because I'm all good, says Brendan. So thank you very much. It is wonderful to be here, and also, as always, so stimulating to hear Donald Smith. Donald was actually very inspirational and encouraging to us in Ireland when we set up Storytellers of Ireland. He's a wonderful setup in Scotland with the Storytelling Centre, which is to be envied, is envied the world over. But anyway, I'll carry on with what I was hoping to do. First of all, kind of in gratitude to Poetry Ireland for supporting us. They support us in many ways. I'd like to start with a poem by the late Brendan Kennelly. It's called The Story. The story was not born with Robbie Cox, nor with his father, nor his father's father, but further back than any could remember. Cox told the story over 12 days of Christmas. It was the story made Christmas real. When it was done, the new year was in, made authentic by the story. The old year was dead, buried by the story. The man endured, deepened by the story. When Cox died, the story died. Nobody had time to learn the story. Christmas shriveled. The old year was dead. The new year, nothing special. So much time to be endured. The people withered. This withering hardly troubled them. The story was a dead crow in a wet field, an abandoned house, a rag on a bush, a sick whisper in a dying room, the shaking gash of an old man's mouth, breaking like burnt paper into black ashes the wind scatters. People fleeing from famine. Nobody has ever heard of them. Nobody will ever speak for them. I know the emptiness spread by the story's death. This emptiness is in the roads and in the fields, in men's eyes and children's voices, in summer nights when stars play like rabbits behind Cox's house of the story that once lived on lips like starlings startled from a tree, exploding in a sky of revelation, deliberate and free. So that, I heard that recited by Brendan Kennelly at a special event to celebrate Eamon Kelly, the Shanachie and actor. And I was very taken by it. I know it is of the past and it does lament a past reality, but it has, I asked him, could I recite it, tell it, and he said, take it away. So I've carried it with me for probably as long as I've been interested in stories. It's kind of somewhere there in the background. However, although that poem by Brendan Kennelly mourns the loss of the story with the death of the storyteller Robbie Cox, the good news is, I think, that storytelling has not died out in the 21st century. Even in the middle of the crisis of the COVID pandemic, when storytellers may have been confined to their hearths and their homes, thanks to the wonders of technology, the story still flew around the world. You could say that the reach of the sharing of stories is wider than ever. People joined the Irish yarn spinning groups from distant parts of the globe and were introduced to the infinite variety of stories which are at the heart of how we communicate as human species on the planet we find ourselves on. And to quote Grace Hallworth, another wonderful mentor and storyteller who died this year, we work with meaning when we share stories. The shortest distance between one human being and another is a story. But the subject we're discussing, what's the scale in Ireland now, has forced me to pause and think. My thinking often goes round and round in circles, and I'm lucky if I get back to the same spot. So with an open mind, I'll go to a story I like. It's a story I heard from the Welsh storyteller, Daniel Morden. It's from his book, here it is here, Dark Tales of the Woods, where he brings together stories from a gypsy storyteller and musician called Abraham Woods, who used to travel the roads of Wales in the 18th century, bringing with him, it is said, the first violin ever played in Wales. The story that came to me is about two brothers, Tom and Jack. They are as alike as chalk and cheese. Jack is easygoing and playful and always up for a laugh. Tom is serious and intense and often bad-tempered. It's New Year's Eve, and Jack suggests that they go to see a wise old woman to find out what the new year will bring. Tom thinks this is a waste of time, but Jack persuades him to go just for the laugh, and you'd never know what the future will bring him. Will bring. The ancient old woman lives in a dark little cave-like house by the roadside. Tom is reluctant to go in, so Jack is in first. He lights her fire and gives her some food, and Tom is hovering at the door. "Hian van," says Jack. "Cut the tide on doing. Old woman, what is our fate?" "Ah," says the old woman, "you want me to tell you if you'll have good luck? Well, that's in your own hands. But I'll give you this stone. Keep it until you come to the crossroads. Spit on it and toss it into the air. If the old golden side lands face up, take the right-hand side. If the black side lands face up, take the left road. Take what you're given and make the best of it." Jack thanked her and said to his brother, "Come on." They set off until they came to the crossroads. The right-hand road led to the mountains, the left hand to fields and farms. The road straight ahead led to a dark forest. Jack pulled out the stone from his pocket. One side was yellow, gold, the other side was black. He threw it up into the air, spat on it first, threw it up into the air, and the yellow side turned up. Jack told Tom what the old woman had said. "Gold side to the right, we'll go to the mountains." "No," says Tom, "are you daft? There's nothing in those mountains, only sheep. We couldn't make a living there. On the left side, there are fields and farms, a chance to get food and work. Don't listen to that own shuck of an owl one." So they decided to split up and meet again in a month. So Jack went to the mountains and Tom went his way, determined to make a living. So I'll stop right there at the story because I've got to the point I was looking for. In my view, oral storytelling in Ireland is at a crossroads right now. Despite the lack of any basic funding, interest in storytelling has grown, as we know, over the last 30 years. Those big festivals, such as Cape Clear Storytelling Festival, by its very presence on the island off the Cork coast, has been a flagship for international storytelling over 25 years. The Yarn Festival of Storytelling in Bray, County Wicklow, which takes place each November, has survived the past 10 years with the artistic support of Mermaid Art Centre and combines community storytelling with theatre performances and brings together different art forms in a very creative way. There's Sneem Storytelling Festival in South Kerry. It's a local festival held together by storyteller Bat Burns and a voluntary committee. It didn't continue during the pandemic, but they have plans to return next year. The Glens Festival in County Antrim has survived the pandemic and receives local support as well as ongoing support from the Armstrong Trust, which allows the indefatigable Liz Weir and her committee to operate a year-long programme training new storytellers and encouraging storytelling in libraries, schools and community settings throughout the north of Ireland. There's a new festival at the Writers' Museum in Listowel, County Kerry. It began this year with great hopes to continue. Moth and Butterfly in Galway combines storytelling and improvisation, as it has proved very popular with audiences, received funding for the festival for the first time this year. They operate very effectively digitally as their audience is part of the digital generation. And happily, We hope this year is the first of many for our host today, the Museum of Country Life. I've been there myself, and it should be the perfect setting with the objects and artefacts in the museum for the development of a new festival in the west of Ireland. And I should mention Collins Barracks. The museum in Collins Barracks played a very important role when Storytellers of Ireland started off. It coincided with the opening of the museum. And thanks to Helen Beaumont there, we had some wonderful festivals for about 10 years. Unfortunately, it didn't last, and I'll try and explain why. Those festivals are important flagships, and they draw people in, because the storytelling resurgence grew almost organically from the interest and desire of a minority to keep those stories alive. But some have not continued due to the fact that the key figures who set them up are no longer available to put the effort into keeping them going. The Arts Council rightly demands stringent professional organisation and aspirations each year, but voluntary groups can only survive so far. And then, what of the individual storyteller? How does she or he survive? Is she to be like Jack, setting out into the unknown, living on her wits and her talents, and taking each day as it comes? Or like Tom, taking very pragmatic decisions to plough a safe furrow, planning her career safely and only going where there's security and funding. The context for oral storytelling, as Donald said, has changed utterly since the time Brendan Kennelly created the poem, and even since the time we in Storytellers of Ireland was founded over 25 years ago. Thanks especially to the inclusion of storytelling and storytellers in the Poetry Ireland Writers in School scheme, a storyteller can find herself in a school one day, or if she's lucky, as a resident storyteller for a series of weeks in a school. This is much more satisfying and useful way of exploring storytelling in education, in my view. She could be employed to tell stories to older people in care homes or community settings. She might work with a visual artist or musician in these sessions, so the emphasis moves from one form of expression to another. Libraries, both north and south of the border, have been proactive with invitations to storytellers, even during lockdown. And best of all, she has learned not to panic in the face of live streaming and pre-recording and the ever-changing challenges of technology. And if tourism ever returns, she might find herself telling stories or to visiting tourists in a hotel, or as part of a whistle-stop tour of the country, an after-dinner break when they're all ready for a good sleep. She could be invited to take part in a big festival and would need the repertoire and stage experience to command attention in a large theatre space. The Arts Council's support for traditional arts, which included storytelling, is and has been a game changer in Ireland. And I'm happy to say that right now, we in Storytellers of Ireland have received some funding under the strand of capacity building, and we're in the process of a consultation with storytellers, organisers and stakeholders with a view to creating a strategic plan for Storytellers of Ireland in the future. And this consultation has been carried out by Siobhan O'Malley, who has a long experience of working in the arts in many different areas, and we do look forward to the results. But you could say, and some do, but there are stories and storytellers everywhere. The world knows that almost everyone in Ireland tells a story. What skills do you need? Donald touched on this too. How can you call yourself a professional storyteller and expect to be paid? I usually cover my own ambivalence by saying that I work with stories. I love stories and I choose to communicate through stories. Often in a school, when I arrive in a classroom, a child will say, "Where's your book?" And if I had a book to read from, that makes sense to them. I usually tap my head and say, "My stories are in here, but I need help from you to get them out," because the listener is as important as the storyteller. Without the listener, there is no story. So our art is the art of communication and collaboration with the audience. It's a two-way process. In Europe and in the US, people talk about a storytelling show, implying that it's an entertainment, rehearsed and planned out in advance and delivered with skill and style, timed to fit into a tight schedule. As a friend of mine said, you have to be a well-oiled machine to fit into that. But here in Ireland, unless you are set up on a stage as in a theatre and facing people out there in the dark, it's likely that someone will want to get involved, comment or share a story themselves. And the storyteller must be open to shifting and changing tack like a lone sailor at sea. What are the skills required? Our colleagues in FEST, the Federation for European Storytelling, to which Storytellers of Ireland have been affiliated since its inception in 2008, have addressed this in a very practical way. They are Europeans after all. In 2017, FEST received a substantial grant from Creative Europe Network funding to enable them to set up a series of events, actions and research projects over 4 years. And in the process, a group who are involved in the education of professional storytellers. They created an interesting and useful toolbox which incorporates the skills or competences, as they call them, a professional storyteller would need. They call it storytelling in 8 colours. The 8 colours cover what they call 8 domains, all of which require different skills. The contemporary storyteller needs the skills of a researcher, a craftsman, an artist, and a performer. The additional skills required are as a trainer in applied storytelling, as a tradition bearer, and entrepreneur. All combined seem like a tall order, but when examined and broken down, those are the skills many individual performers, artists, and musicians need to survive. We have to be like Lú Lámhfhada, we have to be Ildánach to survive. The toolbox is actually a box with colour codes and cards and even practical games and questionnaires. It was created by a group of storytellers from Belgium and Holland who are professionally involved in education, and I believe it's useful in many settings. The aim in Europe is that storytelling be recognised in third-level institutions, just like drama, art, music, and creative writing, and that a system of accreditation is developed in order that the status of storytelling is raised to a higher level than it presently holds. I do not believe there is any such movement in Ireland yet. Our situation is different in Ireland to that of Europe and even the UK. Our history and the great collection and recordings in the National Folklore Collection has meant that storytelling never, as Donald said, totally died out in people's lives here. The 2 world wars, which, although we were affected for sure, did not decimate our population and break violently the memory of the past, as happened in other European countries. You could say the famine did that. Our stories and legends were our wealth and the imaginative spur to drive us on to independence. We do, of course, share those traditions with our fellow storytellers in Northern Ireland. Stories do not recognise borders, and we're very proud that Storytellers of Ireland was incorporated as an all-island organisation, and we hope that will continue into the future. But what of Jack and Tom at the crossroads? Jack had a great time, travelling around, entertaining people, telling stories and having the crack and earning a few bob in the process. Tom worked hard and diligently in the fertile plains and arrived with a bag of food that he worked for the next part of the journey. When it came to sharing the food, however, he charged Jack for each meal. He wanted to teach him a lesson. You get nothing for nothing in this world. And in no time, Jack's money was gone. Poor Jack even loses his eyes in the deal with his brother for food. But of course, being named Jack And after many twists and turns in the story, it all works out in the end. He wins the hand of the princess, and it's Tom has to go back to the crossroads to ask the old woman, Ahyanavan, Kadatana on them, what is my fate? And I believe in Ireland, we are with Tom at this point. There is a lot of activity, but no centre. There was a proposal for an all-island storytelling centre as part of the Cavan County Museum over the past 2 years. The idea has been welcomed by people on both sides of the border. There has been a feasibility study and a design developed by local architects, all supported by Cavan County Council. But as yet, it has not received the necessary funding to carry it forward. Although the organisation Storytellers of Ireland, Scéal, has survived and has a growing membership, our capacity to develop is hindered by dependence on the service of a small number of dedicated people who give of their time and skills voluntarily. We've kept it going, but now the question is, in which direction is it going? In which direction are we facing? We're now in Ireland a multicultural, multi-ethnic society. Our story must include the stories of those who have made Ireland their home. We see this happening all around us in music and in spoken word, which is another form of storytelling, but with a didactic and polemical purpose. But stories are different. As Owen de Bardun says, nobody owns stories, and they change every time they are told, and they are our shared heritage. And that's what I have to say for now. Gurmila Magrath.
Well, thank you very, very much, Nuala. That was wonderful. I haven't been able to see anybody for some reason. I'm not sure what exactly the technical issues are, but I have enjoyed listening to both of you very, very much. And it's just so kind of inspiring just listening there when Donald particularly talked about coming to Northern Ireland, to Derry, and Willie O'Hara, and sort of listening to the stories. And he talked about inherited experiences. He talked about tradition, the creative process, the context, and live storytelling. And what's the scale? What is it all about? Nuala Hayes started off there, which is wonderful, with Brendan Kennelly's poem. It was so inspiring, really. And then she talked about building bridges and about the role of storytelling in education. The risk involved in being a story. Why be a storyteller anyway? What is it all about? But she also said something very interesting. I think she said, stories do not recognize boundaries. And I think that is an amazing thing, because I was this morning on the radio with Tom, and we talked about this thing about my mother's cousin in the United States, went there way back in the 30s. And he talked a lot about meeting people from different cultures. A lot didn't have English as a first language. But when they sat around having a cup of tea, they talked about the homeland and they talked about the stories. And what he couldn't believe was that the stories they told were so similar. The languages and backgrounds and everything were so different. And I suppose maybe that's what you talk about there, Nuala, when you say stories don't recognize borders. I mean, you took us through the whole story of what's happening today in Ireland in storytelling, and the effort that lots of people are making to get it on its feet. I want to throw this open out to both of you. You know, when we have a panel now, we can talk a little bit about maybe the role of media and storytelling today. Is the story, as we have known it in the past, the tradition, is it capable of surviving in the face of multimedia and all the skills and stories and programs that are blown at us every day, and Netflix and television and whatever? So, Nuala, I'd just like to throw that open to you first, a little bit about media today and storytelling. Maybe you could say a few words on that.
Well, I suppose you'd have to ask, do you mean the mass media? Do you mean radio? Do you mean television? Or do you mean the digital technology?
Well, I suppose digital technology, really, the world of young people today.
Yeah. Well, personally, I was totally amazed. I was initially very skeptical about this idea of, going online and having storytelling sessions online. It was quite a challenge. I remember the very first one that I engaged in the early day, in the early part of 20, well, it must have been 2019, when it all began. And I remember there was we were bombed. Remember those bombs that would interfere with these awful images came up, and then Zoom got it together, and slowly but surely and amazingly, now we are extraordinary human beings. We actually learned how to survive, and many of the yarn spinning groups went digital. In Cork, they went digital. Liz Weir every Saturday night had sessions digitally, and there even a new group started digitally, and new storytellers emerged who had never actually. I am inclined to exaggerate. Some storytellers emerged digitally, who had never told stories in real life, and got quite a shock when the real life session started. Then that she was actually talking to.
That's
So
right.
yeah, very.
Yeah, I think, and a very interesting point as well came up there. I think when Donald talked a little bit about Scotland and Ireland, and he talked about, even though we had similar backgrounds in lots of ways, there was a difference between the two traditions, storytelling traditions. And he talked about the inherited experiences. And I'd like, Donald, maybe you could say something about that, Scotland versus Ireland, the storytelling, the inherited experiences.
Sure. Just maybe a wee comment on the media thing, just as I lead into that. It's been fascinating to watch how flexible storytelling has been in different media, and some of the digital stuff has got that kind of quite intimate possibility, the reading of the face and all the rest of it. But at the same time, in the general context of media across the whole piece, which has a great potential, of course, to help promote storytelling and storytellers and stories, there's also, I think, a second-handedness that creeps in. I think that the real power of this oral memory storytelling thing is in its immediacy. This immediacy of me sharing a connection that is quite rooted in my imagination, because I'm having to share it with you. And I think that, picking then up on the Scotland-Ireland thing, the idea of the céilí, now that would be in the sense not of a country dance, but of the original meaning of the word in Scottish Gaelic anyway, visiting, the capacity of people to get together to make their own entertainment, and how that could develop, the way in which a céilí, and maybe you can echo some of this online, but I think it has its greatest power in the flesh, as it were, that the way it can move in unpredictable directions, because somebody is going to share a story or raise an experience or a memory or tell a joke, and it spins something off in someone else. Someone will then sing a song. Somebody will go down another route, and this could go somewhere really quite deep in shared experience. And I think that what we have in common in Ireland and Scotland is that sense of the céilí. And in our contemporary storytelling, I think we've tried to tap into that kind of creative dynamic and potential in lots of other contexts and situations. But of course, we are different countries, and you've got independence, and we're battling for ours, and storytelling is part of that. Some traditions lasted longer in Scotland. That's often misunderstood. It wasn't really until after the crushing of the Jacobite Rising and the repression of Highland and Gaelic culture in the late 18th century that some of the continual storytelling and song traditions were lost. So there's a very creative mix, and we can always learn from each other, and have a bit of argy-bargy sometimes too.
Yeah. You said something interesting there. You talked about, that Ireland had its independence, that Scotland doesn't yet have. And somehow I think you hinted at a relationship between independence, political, social, economic independence, and storytelling. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, or is it?
Well, I'll tell you just a pragmatic reality around that, Terry. The public support, and this is responding a wee bit to some of the detail that Nuala was sharing there about the ongoing struggle to get public support for storytelling, which is why it's great to see this event. We got a lot of public support in the later part of the 20th century and into the 21st and continuing in Scotland, because, in my view, our renaissance of storytelling coincided with devolution, with the restoration of a Scottish Parliament, with a whole change in social and cultural atmosphere in the country. And I think people recognized that storytelling was an important part of that, and that in fact, storytelling had maintained a lot of things in a kind of local resistance kind of way through centuries, where our own culture had essentially been suppressed in education, in religion, and in politics. So I think the wider political context does matter. I'm not trying to politicize storytelling, which is all these other purposes and functions, but that's just a fact in the Scottish situation. The development of storytelling in a contemporary in Scotland coincided with the whole devolution process.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I suppose Nuala hinted there a little bit we talked about the professional storyteller as opposed to the person who just tells the story. Is the professional storyteller really necessary? Or if we take the professional out of it, do the stories continue anyway in this world we live in today? The world of, as we talked about, digital media and all the rest. And is it really that important? I mean, we have suggested there that it is important because it carries on all kinds of traditions, and it's the spirit and the soul of what it means to be human, to tell a story. But if we take the professional out of it, would the story survive? Maybe, Nuala, you might say something on that.
Well, the context for storytelling has changed utterly. There are people don't visit each other. Well, people don't visit each other for the sake of entertainment much anymore. They might visit for dinner parties, or they might, visit just to check in on each other. But that sense of the family entertainment has kind of ended, except for certain families in Ireland still do have, you have to have your party performance, etc. But I think storytelling is important as a profession because of the imaginative aspect of what creating a story, telling a story, or retelling a story does and is. When we started telling stories, there was a perception within, say, education, for example, that children couldn't concentrate. This came from television, children, and selling things to children. Children couldn't concentrate for less than a certain length of time, or you had to change immediately. They had these, flitty butterfly brains, and that wouldn't work. And where we discovered in communicating with stories that the ability of the human brain to concentrate in a narrative is actually, there's almost no end to it. A good story told can be as long as it is. And that's why to have the skills as a professional performer, I think you learn that. You start off, sharing, swapping stories, but then eventually, if you are put into different situations, as I was describing, you have to learn the skills needed for that. And they include, physical skills. You have to be well. You can't, go around coughing, and, you really have to look after yourself. And so there is a degree of, anybody will tell you, to survive, you do have to pay attention to the technical aspects of performance. That's what I would believe anyway.
So can I add a wee bit to that, Terry? Just is to say, I think that of course the communities and family side of storytelling continues, and it's a kind of rich subsoil to everything. But in a complex society of the kind we have now, to get the full benefit and potential of storytelling, you need these, and that's why I call them bridge builders. I think that you need these people who have that professional capacity to take the skills and the engagement potential of storytelling into different social and cultural settings. And I think that's what contemporary storytellers, Nuala was describing that sort of range of skills. It's not just about standing up and being able to perform a story. It's about being able to relate that to special educational needs, to health situations, and to, because we've talked a lot, we've got a lot of museum people here, the interpretation, for example, of museum collections and background social understandings through story. These are all things that have real skills, exciting and interesting skills, which both professional storytellers and other professionals, like teachers and curators and so on, can tap into. Yeah.
Right. Just one small point. We have to move on a little bit in a few moments, but it's been really, really interesting. The notion of, we have the professional storyteller, we have the storyteller from the past around the hearth. And I distinctly remember myself as a child, we had the fair days in the small towns. And I distinctly remember listening to the travellers, we call them tinkers then, the travellers singing the ballads and songs of the region. And they were telling stories as well, and there was a relationship between the ballad and the story, and this, the tales that were told around the hearth and the stories on the tales on the street. Maybe would either of you like to say something about that tie-up between the ballad and the story as such, and carrying on?
I'll say a tiny thing and then hand it to Nuala. So our travelling people played a huge part in the renaissance of storytelling in Scotland, and what they offered was exactly that seamless connection between story, song, proverb, oral lore, folk wisdom of all kinds. And they were absolutely somebody which had been a despised and marginalized community, absolutely came to the fore and was honored through the storytelling renaissance for exactly those reasons that you're describing.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that there for a moment, because I distinctly remember myself, listening on the street corner in Culchmach and the fair day when the cattle were bought and sold and men were having a drink. And on the street corner, you'd have the traveller, we called them tinkers then, the travelling people, and singing the song and selling the sheet music for a penny, which I was fascinated, and you'd buy it and learn the song at home. And so the tradition was being carried on, the story was being passed on in this way. And that's why I just wanted to prompt a little bit in that direction, and the relationship between the story and the music. It's not just one thing, it's everything, isn't it? It's all part of the whole cultural package that a society inherits and passes along.
I was just going to pick up on my observation in Scotland was it was the famous, Duncan Williamson, Stanley Robertson, those were the people in Scotland that inspired the Renaissance and resurgence. Whereas we in Ireland, it was a more political use of the stories through the artists, you know, like Yeats, Lady Gregory, and the collectors earlier on, who realized that the art of the people, you know, that stories and ballads and songs are the art of the people, were a valuable a richness that, and then of course it was kind of harnessed within the education system, because we all grew up with the stories of the legends, Cuchulainn, the Fianna, all that. That was kind of embedded in our education within the Republic anyway, or the Free State as people would like to call it. But it just one other it was a slight difference, but there has, thankfully now, and recently at Yarn Festival, we met Owen de Bardoon, who has brought out the first ever original collection of travellers' stories, and they are the stories that weren't collected by settled people, and they're absolutely wonderful and magical. And I can only imagine what hearing your stories will do for the traveling community. Hearing their own stories told by travelers will do, it's quite transformative, you know. So it's wonderful. It's this book here, Why the Moon Travels, and very interesting to talk to him.
What's
about,
that book again, Nuala?
Called Why the Moon Travels.
Why the Moon Travels, yeah. Because yeah, go on, sorry.
No, just interesting to talk to him about the importance of storytelling in the traveller community, how important it was in terms of learning, in terms of passing on old traditions. You know, it's really about being open and listening to what's going on as well.
I suppose basically people like Yeats and, you know, they did go around they collected all the stories, but I grew up in Killadan with the whole raftery tradition, you know, and then I would hear that these on the street corner, these songs, and listen to them and learn them by heart. And you had people like Margaret Barry, Maggie Barry, as they called her, and that. But they were so far away from that whole Yeatsian thing that came later. You know, they were this was the kind of the authentic thing on the street. And that I was just trying to sort of make, the tie up between the story and the ballad, how they're basically part of the same family, aren't they?
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. Now, on that, I think we might have to move on a little bit. And
so, Terry, just to say that Brendan has sent you a link. I know you're struggling because you're not able to see everybody, but Brendan has sent you a link, and he says that if you hit that link and join through it, you'll get the full glorious Technicolor pictures when there's a convenient moment.
A link. Go back to my email and take up on that link again. It must be, I think, because I can see nothing.
Well, just leave it. Don't worry, because we're in flow. We're in flow.
We're in flow. Exactly. Now we have to. I think we have to move on a little bit. It's been fascinating, really, listening to the two of you there and opening up the discussion. You know, for people in general, for all of us, really, you know, to think about where our story comes from, what it is, how important the story is in our lives, the role that it plays in shaping us as people, in keeping us balanced as human beings, psychologically, physically, and everything else, meeting with others, the social side, and also the emotional side of a story. I think we're probably now ready to move on to the question and answer part of this program. So I have to wait for the questions to come up. So Brendan and Tom, where are we at the moment?
So Brendan's wondering if you can see the chat. Can you see the chat on your screen?
I can't see anything.
Yeah, right.
There's nothing. I don't know what to do.
No. So what, Brendan? What is the link that you wanted Tony to use? Is it the link on his email, or is it a link in a message? But he's not able to get the message. I've sent one to Terry's email. So it is in your email. It maybe sounds like if you go to your email and rejoin Terry,
I do that.
We'll get the whole, because then you'll be able to see the questions as they come
Right.
in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on. There's something coming up now.
Ah,
Yeah, coming up now.
excellent.
Right. So I see there's a question here. Liz Weir has made a comment here. Storytellers from the Armstrong Trust are working with 5 museums in the north, with the museum itself using materials from the collection and folk tales on a project with people living with dementia. There's an interesting thing from Liz Weir. And I see there's another one here. You might know something about that, Nuala. Do you? Anything about it?
Yes, indeed, I do. Liz Weir and her the group she works with in the north, I do like they to ask the question, why do you need a storyteller? They operate in many different levels right across the community, and Liz herself is very expert in working with people who have lost their memory and in stimulating them. And also Donald talked about the area of storytelling in health and in healing too, very much there.
Yeah. So Bishop, sorry, excuse me.
Tom has said there.
Tom Doyle says then he remembers reading once that the Irish Folklore Commission never collected from dirty houses, inferring that collectors chose their informants according to the ideals and standards being being propagated by the young Irish Republic. Was there a wealth of mate?
Well, I definitely think that's one for Christo McCarthy in the Irish Folklore Commission. I don't think
so a thing that I always love about the Irish folklore thing was the way that the children in the schools became collectors. They were sent home to collect stories from mums and dads and to bring them in, and there's all those incredible heaps and heaps, really, basically, of school jotters full of these stories. And I noticed that recently the commission has been sending back digital copies of some of those stories that were gathered by the kids back to where they came from. And that raises an interesting point about one of the connections is between generations. And I think that that's one of the powers that stories has. So that thing of that's a standard thing we would do in projects, getting kids in schools to link up with older community members and become themselves gatherers of stories is a kind of interesting side.
I see, following on from that, I see Anya Carr has, maybe we need a school's folklore collection again to collect stories. Maybe that's just a small point, maybe following on yours there, Donald.
Well, it is something that those of us who go to schools would always talk about. And say, for example, if you were going to a particular school in Mayo or in Kerry or wherever, the first thing I would do would be connect in with the duchas.ie and see what are the local stories, and then work with the children who are living now to say which of those stories connect with you. Are there stories like that they're still around? And so we're able to use that collection very creatively in schools, I think. And of course, in the end, because we're not with them all the time, it really depends on their teacher. But I do know that teachers also use the school collection to awaken memories also.
There's a lovely thing about that as well, where it's a way of recognizing families and traditions that have a diverse origin. So in a school where you may have children from different cultural and ethnic traditions, it's a way of recognizing their tradition and culture as part of the community space now. So that's another interesting kind of project.
Jane O'Hanlon says here, aren't all art forms in some way political in their, in some way political with a small p, because, oh, the thing is bouncing on me here, because the thing has disappeared off my screen, but there's political in some way with a small p, as she says.
Yeah, so the last bit of it is because that's where societal change first manifests. Well, but listen, folks, we've just been through this whole COP26 thing here, and I think we're in a situation now where if we don't have change driven by communities from the grassroots, we're going to be in big trouble, because the governments and big business, are not moving at the pace that is going to work to keep us in a stable environment. And so I feel more radical about the potential for stories and storytelling to challenge the powers that be in our society. And maybe that has got to have a big P political dimension now. I feel more radical about the connections between storytelling and social and political environmental activism than I've done at any point through the decades, where just as Jane's saying there, I've always acknowledged that small p political dimension. I think storytellers maybe could be quite vital voices in speaking up for the well-being of society now as a whole.
Yeah, I see that Pat Ryan here, storyteller, says Jack Lynch and other Irish artists and storytellers have been working with Syrian and Palestinian communities and shared stories from these communities with other groups in Ireland. So I suppose that's, in a sense, political with a small or big P, whichever you wish, isn't it? Following a bit on yours there, Donald, on your observations about politics now.
Totally. But I think this environmental thing, I mean, and I know Nuala's done work in that, researching old creation myths and stories, like those connected here in Scotland with the kayak, and in Ireland also, about
the very essence of storytelling, because of its direct simplicity, is almost anti shows art which demands a lot of resources. What's extraordinary about people talking about, oh, there are no resources, we don't have enough resources. The resources required for the storytelling experience are minimal in a way, but also the stuff of the stories, I think, in themselves bring us to a time of resilience and people making what they can. I mean, there's a very famous basic story about the tailor and the button, about creating a story out of nothing. And stories do come from the stuff of life. And so I just think in their essence, they are ecologically right on. If everything falls apart, we'll still have our stories. There were a couple of sessions in Fest this year talking about storytelling and the environment, and there are some storytellers who will only operate now, will only tell stories that are in favor of the environment and sustainability. So they've kind of moved very much away from storytelling as an entertainment. Storytelling is there to change society.
Well, I suppose basically that question about, other cultures, the Palestinians or whichever other culture group we wish to talk about, perhaps that is also very political. And I would just like to ask, Nuala, have you done some work, or maybe Donald as well, with people from, as diverse as we'd say, Palestinians, and how does one reach them with our stories or their stories? How does one go about that?
Well, for me, I last year before the lockdown, I was working in County Wicklow. I was doing some background research on migration, and I spent time going in and out to the people who were living in the direct provision centre in Bray, in Wicklow town, and I wouldn't make any claims about storytelling being, the answer to the problems that they have. They're concerned with everyday issues of their lives, where they're going to get a job, where they're going to live, etc., etc. But it was really, I did work with them and introduced them to the young people I was working with in Bray, who were creating this program of music and stories. And so it was really reaching out in a way of friendship was the most important thing there. And to know that there are people in the community who are outside and want to talk to them. So I would refuse to make those kind of claims that the world can be changed by storytelling, but I think it's an important aspect of it. I think that living conditions come first, and that was very clear to me. But then doing research into the project, of course, brought me back to the amount of migration that has happened on our island. Again and again, people were moving to Ireland, adapting, fitting in or not, wanting to take over or being defeated. So our lives are a story of movement, migration, change, and politics are there with a big P or a small p. You don't escape from that.
Right. Go on, sorry.
So maybe just coming in the back of that briefly, the two big things that we've found working with our refugee and asylum seeker communities is there is an appreciation in that sense of welcome, of sharing local, particularly actually local music in the first instance, and sometimes dance, because there's less of a verbal sort of barrier there. So that's appreciated, that sense of a cultural connection. And the other thing, and funnily enough, this bounces slightly on Tom there, keeps trying to get in a question about what is the closeness of the relationship of Irish and Scottish stories. And what you find, of course, there's this fascinating thing in traditional stories, however they've developed and are expressed, where you see these commonalities because they're about fundamental human experiences, and then they're, as it were, reclothed with different cultural atmospheres and languages. And therefore, in a situation where you have the migration thing, as we've had between Scotland and Ireland in big scale over past centuries, you get this sense of difference, but then also this recognition of commonality. And I think that happens with other cultures, with African storytelling, with Middle Eastern. And, you've got to remember, folk tradition is an international thing. And part of the resource is the locality, and part of the resource is the human connection worldwide.
Right. I see here Sean O'Leary has talked a little bit about passing stories on from one generation to the next. Is that something that is still happening today? Are we passing them on?
Well, if you're asking me, I am
throwing the question out,
yeah. I think people pass their values on, and pass what they value in their lives on to their children. And there's nothing people still connect very strongly with what has gone before them. But from my point of view, I've years and years and years with my grandchildren. I was the one who told the stories at night time. And even half my family is emigrated to Australia. And when the children were younger, that was what used to happen. I would appear in the bedroom at night to tell them the good night stories, even though I was on the other side of the world. So I think it is happening. But I think I have to say too, though, that educational emphasis on reading is so huge, and books and literacy, there's such a huge emphasis on it that for many people, you know, reading stories and not using the kind of the left side of the brain to kind of imagine, retell, etc., is probably emphasized much more than the oral telling of stories. I think there's a kind of a fear, and also the, you know, entertainment via television and cinema and the computer is such a huge thing too. But it all comes down to human connection. You know, if you have a good connection with down the generations, then naturally the stories remain, I think.
I suppose in a way too, the story does reflect where we're at politically, socially, emotionally in any society. And I'm just looking here at the screen and I see Liz Weir again says there are lots of requests for environmental storytelling in schools today. And I suppose that does reflect what's happening. You know, you have Greta Thunberg and all the rest, and the climate question. So maybe that is a reflection of how children are thinking.
So Terry, on that
today, or, you know,
sorry.
education, you talk about education. Carry on, yeah.
So just on that, sorry, Terry, on that, you know, children and young people and how they think. I worry that we are in a situation now where children and young people are being pushed into a kind of anxiety situation. I think that despite all the good things that within some families and schools and all the rest of it, connections are built, that actually there's never been more need for the older generations to identify now with the young and to get alongside and listen to their stories and experiences. You know, like it's a two-way kind of process. I think intergenerational solidarity is so now vital and important because you know, and there's all sorts of factors in that, the kind of social media kind of culture. We haven't talked around that a lot, which many young people can get boxed into, quite trapped by. And the whole environmental situation and crisis, I just feel that there's a sort of danger running at the moment that younger generations really are feeling that we don't have their well-being at heart.
Well, that's very interesting. We don't have their well-being at heart. That's an interesting observation, you know, because of, you know, all of the media and digital stuff that's being thrown at them. But then again, how necessary is it that we feed these children maybe the legends and tales from way back in the past? Maybe all their dragons and tales and legends, maybe they're being formed today for them, and that what we have received isn't necessarily playing a sort of a major role in their, you know, definition of what it means to be human today.
Yeah, but we need to create space that we can listen to those stories and experiences. You see,
Yeah.
It's back to this thing about what the public culture in all its dimensions reflects. And I saw there's a thing there is Jane was saying about what's the great challenge with young people. Well, I mean, one of the challenges that isn't there is there's a tremendous talent and energy amidst children and young people in telling stories themselves. And sometimes that can be stimulated and set going by sharing an older story or tradition. but then to give them their head, and it's quite amazing what comes out. But I just do have this, as I have grandchildren now too as well, and I worry what is the world, what is the world we're passing on to those grandchildren now?
I suppose it's a definition, really. I do a lot of work in schools as well, and I do notice when you're in a primary school in Ireland, the children are so full of talk, and they're full of stories and tales and legends, and they tell you all about their families and this and that, and it's a lot of fun. But once they get into secondary school and things begin, life gets serious, and the digital world takes over and everything else, it's very hard sometimes to get people to ask questions, to actively engage in completing the story or the story of their own lives and passing it on, because everything is directed, I suppose, towards a form of success. Would you have that experience as well, Nuala?
Yes, indeed. I would always be wary of the fear word, but I think it's there. When you talk about the past, and the fear that was the role that stories had in keeping children inside safe. There's a fear outside, but nowadays the other world for a lot of us is this digital world that young people move into, and what they're hearing in that world, and what they're experiencing. And I think the sharing of experiences with them is probably the only way that they will talk, if we can talk about that sense of another world. So I often think the other world is still there, but it's now inside technology. But just reaching out can help, and being there. I just try to keep au fait with it all, and also there's a lot of things, because of the generation that I come from, that I don't really fully get about the digital world. So I find I ask my grandchildren, you teach me, tell me, show me, I know all about Minecraft now and all that sort of thing, and allow them to tell you how wonderful it is too, because it is wonderful for them as well. So it's all about sharing, and even if it's sharing confusion or stories of confusion, a story will generally bring you somewhere else that you wouldn't go by saying, how long did you spend on your tablet today, or turn off that computer, but to try and connect with them in a different kind of a way, I hope could work. But it's that golden thread thing is very important. Wherever the thread is, hang into it.
Yeah, I suppose, you said there while you were in your talk earlier on, you talked about the crossroads, and I that word keeps coming into my mind. What are we talking about? We're talking about a crossroads today. Maybe both of you might have some comment on that. What do we mean, a crossroads of what? What's the crossroads?
Well, my thinking was very, very personal, in that, we in Ireland, in Storytellers of Ireland, need some resources, to be honest.
Oh, yeah, I see. Okay, yeah.
I was thinking about, that it wasn't as much in there, of course, there's the philosophical one, but looking at the experience in Scotland, that has a fully professional storytelling centre, with the resources, somebody with Donald's vision, and with the people that he has working with him, can actually ask those questions. It's impossible for us in Ireland now, really, to ask those questions unless we're just chatting to each other at general meetings. But we're at that point where we have to say, listen, we do have a role, give us support. That's really what's the crossroads I was talking about. It was more practical.
Right. I mean, there are lots of the general. Sean O'Leary says, interesting, Pat. He's gone down. The general storytelling could be recalled narrative, sharing, and storytelling. Well, what that exactly means, but it's he talks about is recalled narrative, a recalled narrative. What would that mean?
So
Sharing.
It's quite interesting. I just a general comment. There's so much wisdom and knowledge in this commentary from the people who are in this session. I feel a bit of a cod as in here because there's so there's tremendous sort of knowledge and information pouring out this thing because there's so many experienced people. And what I would say then to the idea to set up the Scottish Storytelling Centre began in Derry as in a gathering hosted by Liz Weir, who's on this call today. And we all felt that in our different regions and countries, we should have a storytelling centre. And, you know, us sort of being thorough to this kind of Presbyterian sobriety went away and did it. And I think that the kind of knowledge and experience that you have in Ireland in both the traditional and the contemporary sense are crying out for a focus. And whether that could be some centre connected with one of the national museums or the universities or a community base or whatever, it's just a kind of, I think it's sort of an obvious component of everything else. And but in a bigger sense, the crossroads is the challenges we face socially, culturally, environmentally, politically across the world. And in each nation and community, we have to think, what can we contribute to that? And surely something we can contribute that we've richly inherited from the past is our sense of storytelling, our sense of humanity, our capacity to bring people together, to share real human experience, to bridge the divides, to challenge the ridiculous stereotypes that govern so much of people's thinking and fears. This is what storytelling does. This is what it can do. So, you know, this is what we're here today to encourage and to thank the people who are hosting this Scéal task, but to hope this is just a seed for much more that can develop and come, and it's all there for Ireland to do.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying there. It's very true. You know, I think Jane O'Hanlon's comment there about this being an annual event is a fantastic idea, and I think the museum deserves so much credit for even starting it. So it is a real chance, I think, for the future. You know, when you think of things like here, I see Dennis O'Sullivan talks about his family and pirates coming to Ireland, visiting Ireland and things like that. I mean, that kind of daftness is still in people's heads, you know, this notion of the fantasy world and the pirates and all the rest is absolutely amazing. And it is the kind of thing that we have to nurture and keep alive. And as I said, I think Tom Doyle has asked me the future. Can you? Oh, sorry, the thing is bouncing a bit here. Can you ask what future role do museums play in interpreting collections through story and storytelling? Through story and storytelling.
So I'm going to be commenting that, and we actually saw a wee bit of it when Nuala was telling her story. Storytelling depends on visual imagination. Although it's words, it's all about visual imagination. And a museum is a treasure house of visual imagination. And the way that stories and storytelling can help interpret and reflect both the background of the objects, the use of the objects, the imaginative dimension of objects and collections, the way those objects themselves may tell or imply a story or stories. Again, it's just a fantastic relationship. And yeah, museums. There was a Carnegie Trust report, that must be 20 years ago or whatever, that said museums should be places of curiosity, learning, and imagination. And I've always said to museum folk, well, you know, storytelling is about curiosity, learning, and imagination. So we must be on a joint ticket, you know.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I distinctly remember doing some workshops and having children, imagine themselves being one of these objects in a museum and putting themselves into the situation and telling a story from the point of view of a brush or whatever you want to call it, or a sort of turf or something. And it was the most amazing thing. The whole thing took off in a whole new direction. And I think that is, supports the idea that the storytelling, the museum, the role of the museum in a society in keeping all these objects and making them alive for the children of today and tomorrow is really, really important. Following Tom's question and also Jane O'Hanlon's. Right now,
could I just say?
Yeah,
could I just add something to that? It strikes me that I could be wrong, but I know they're very committed. There's very committed work in museums around education, but a lot from the point of view of storytellers, it's a question of a storyteller is engaged to come along and tell stories. There's a kind of a randomness about it, but I think it might be an interesting thought or proposal that maybe a storyteller might be asked at a certain stage to become a resident have a residency in a museum, as you might have in a library or in a school, and it would give the storyteller then a chance to really familiarize themselves with what's there and find a creative way of working with stories. My experience up to now is that it's, you get your call, come down and tell stories, but there's a kind of an arbitrariness about it, which maybe could change away from the idea of, doing tours, but maybe just forming a relationship that might be more nourishing, I suppose, for both sides. It's just a thought, if that might be something.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to do is to put shape and form on it, Nuala, aren't you? To sort of to give it its own identity and its own address and home and everything else, and build on it from there. I think that's what you have in mind. I see another observation here, a person from Argentina, from the other side of the world. This has been a great conversation to understand what is the situation of storytelling for colleagues in other countries. I think, isn't that amazing, really, that, people we have today, our technology, digital world and everything else is reaching out as far as Argentina, and they're taking part in this conversation, which is a real story in itself, is it not? The international aspect of the whole thing. Now, are there any other observations you'd like to make, Nuala or Donald? Anything that you feel that we need to go back over, discuss, emphasize? Nuala has talked a lot about, not a lot, but has suggested that it would be really important if we could, with Jane O'Hanlon and Tom, of course, that this could be repeated and it could be developed into something that would maybe find expression in a centre, and that it wouldn't just be some kind of random thing where somebody came along and told stories and everybody had a great laugh and clapped and went off again, and there was no follow-up. I think your idea is big.
We're very limited what we have at the moment in Storytellers of Ireland. We have a directory, and it's up to people who are interested in stories, to look at the directory, decide, who they're interested in talking to. We have no funding whatsoever as an organization, and nor are we in a position to say, oh, this is who you need, you should talk to this person, because, that's another kind of responsibility. Whereas in Scotland, they have evolved a way of evaluating what each storyteller can give to a situation. Sometimes it happens informally, but in Ireland, we really are lagging behind in that area, in that we do not have any, responsible professional organization. We're simply a group of people, of well-meaning people who really believe in the value of stories, but we are not an organization, and we're not funded to be an organization. So I just feel a centre is very important. If it's attached to a museum, well and good, but I think everybody could benefit if there was an administrative set up that could set up these, connect with these meetings.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, obviously, it's very close to your heart. This notion of putting shape and form and getting support and funding and everything else to build something more solid that the storytellers of the country could get their feet and get their teeth into. What did Sean O'Leary says? It has been a great experience. Thank you. No goats will be milked today. So I thought, well, now, Sean, that's a great comment, and it's a very it's a very interesting one, and I'm sure there won't be a goat anywhere over here in the West anyway milked today. Maybe Tom might have something to say on that one. Now, the Cavan Museum has plans to develop Ireland's first national storytelling centre. Have you heard of that, Nuala?
Yes, indeed. Yes, I referred to that earlier.
Yeah,
We work
right.
with them, but as yet there's no funding to do it. But everything is set up, ready to go. So if there's anybody from Cavan there, it's really up to Cavan. All the background work has been done. It's a very good situation in that it's close to the border. It's close to a museum, and I think it could be there. It has huge possibilities, and the design is there, the study is there, but all it needs is the light and the funding, the green light and the funding.
You need a little millionaire somewhere, somebody
Well,
with a deep
or
pocket.
but it is. I mean, Donald and the Scottish Storytelling Centre were attached to what was it, the Church of Scotland,
Netherbow Art
the
Centre.
Netherbow Centre. Yes, yeah, and you evolved from that. Yeah. So it's probably something that could evolve from the work of a museum anyway, and then. Yeah. You know, with training, you see, it's very hard to say, you know, where are the storytellers coming from? That's a question that we haven't asked. Is it arbitrary? You know, there might be a workshop and people go to the workshop and think, oh, that's something I would love to do. And some people are very enthusiastic for a while and then they move off and they do something else. But it's only a small number of people that can actually have enough energy to just keep going and develop all the different skills to make it sustainable, not to make it a community hobby.
Donald, can I just ask you? Sorry, there, Nuala, for cutting across. Donald, when you talk in Scotland, obviously it's on a very solid footing, thanks to you and I'm sure many others. What has been the real success for you in Scotland, having a centre and having solid footing?
So I don't want to overemphasize the institutional side of all that. I think the institutions and organizations, the Association of Storytellers, having a professional administrative support, I think these are all key elements. But the thing that drives it is really what Nuala touched on there. And then I saw somebody in the chat saying that they were a novice storyteller. It feels a little bit like walking out under a blue sky and looking for a lightning bolt.
Oh yeah, I see this. Yeah.
Well said, Adam. But
hope it doesn't hit you though.
I know. No, but you see, the driving energy is that developing your storytelling skills, whether you are going to be a community-based person, a professional storyteller, a teacher who uses storytelling, a museum curator, it is liberating. It is a tremendous development of personal and interpersonal skills. And the great driving force is absolutely the sheer pleasure and enlightenment and joy that comes from the art of telling and sharing stories. And of course, it begins with the art of listening, of being good listeners. And so I think that where the storytellers come from, there's this tremendous well of human capacity and potential and interest. And my God, it kept storytelling going for centuries, if not millennia, without a button of public, money or support. So we need all those things, but what we're tapping into is an energy or resource that is there in our core humanity, and to release that, to develop that, to express that is beneficial on every front. It can only increase the well-being of a society in all its dimensions.
And do you find that the numbers of people wanting to be storytellers has increased?
Yes, absolutely. And younger people. And we get young audiences for our events. It's interesting. There's the teenage blip, right, where it's not cool, which is fine, but don't get trapped in a social media bubble. But then really from a kind of student type age, then people are coming back in and getting re-engaged. And I'm astonished at the diversity of our audiences. So festivals like this are important because they offer new audiences a chance to come in and experience something, and you suddenly realize, oh, just a minute, there's a whole interest amidst that age group or that section of society. So anyway, we're running out of time, I realize, but and I don't want to go on, but this is something that has core inspirational benefit, and it's rooted in personal experience and capacity. It can only be something that affirms and supports people.
Yeah, it's a fantastic. Sorry, Nuala.
Lorraine mentioned there historical empathy, which I think is quite important too, because that's an area very often you might be in a school talking or telling a story, and a teenager will say, oh, if only history was like that. Because one thing storytelling can do is it moves away from the cold scientific facts and statistics. Often it will it will present the facts and statistics in the form of something very rich and interesting, and we operate on empathy in that way. The imagination is awoken through empathy rather than through facts and statistics. And
I suppose though the history teacher is, I don't want to be facetious, the history teacher is there every day, day in, day out, in wet and cold weather and everything else. And the storyteller comes in and tells a wonderful story, and the kids love it, and rightly so. But it's just the difference, I suppose. One is the role of a teacher and the other one is the role of the storyteller.
Well, teachers could be storytellers too, I think.
Well, I could, I suppose, but it's very difficult to be a storyteller every day for this. Anyway, that's another story altogether. Anyway, I think all in all, I think we've had a wonderful discussion. I think we are gradually drawing to a close. If I think I'm right in saying that. Is that okay, Tom? Or I think we have had a wonderful time, a wonderful discussion. It's been, as Jane O'Hanlon says, very successful, and she congratulates everybody, and I would like to do that as well, particularly the museum, Tom and Brendan and everybody involved, Lorraine, everybody in the background who have made it possible and put this together. These things don't happen overnight. There's a lot of hard work, and particularly in times we have at the moment where people can't meet face to face and they wear masks and all this kind of stuff. Yet they managed to get this festival off the ground and on its feet, and everybody is to be congratulated, and I'm absolutely delighted to have been part of it. And I suppose especially with Nuala and Donald here being so interesting and so informative, and I suppose giving us all a sort of something to think about, which is really, really important. And hopefully from today something new will come to provoke us and provoke maybe governments and politicians and whoever to begin to think about next year's festival, which hopefully does take place. Now, I would just like to say tomorrow at 2:30, we've Len Graham, singer, and also storyteller, wonderful international personality, and Jack Lynch, who is to everybody in Ireland, and not just Ireland, all over everywhere, is so well known as a storyteller. And they are on tomorrow at 2:30. And it's adult, but I suppose you can bring the children in there too, but it's storytelling for adults. So on that note, I would like to say I'm looking forward very much to seeing Len and Jack tomorrow at 2:30 here on digital screens. So on that note, goodbye and thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.